Okay, boys and girls, you just listened to a video that gave you a broad overview of what the Holocaust was. And in the video, it mentioned propaganda, right? And so today, we are going to be looking at Nazi propaganda and how it played a role in fueling the Holocaust, right? It says here that Hitler, right? Propaganda tries to force a doctrine on the whole people. Propaganda works on the general public from the standpoint of an idea and makes them ripe for the victory of this idea. Adolf Hitler wrote these words in his book Mein Kampf in 1926. It is where he first advocated the use of propaganda to spread the ideals of National Socialism, including racism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Bolshevism. The Reich propaganda. After the Nazis, you remember we talked about the Nazis yesterday, the Nazi Party, after the Nazis seized or took over power of Germany in 1933, Adolf Hitler, established a Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, and it was headed by this guy, Joseph Goebbels. The ministry aimed to ensure the Nazi message was successfully communicated through art, music, theater, books, radio, educational materials, and the press, meaning the news media and the print media, like the newspapers. Okay, so the propaganda is a vehicle, right? Or it was used as a way to put out falsehoods about people, okay? And it was a quick way to do it by spreading it through radio, through educational materials in school, to make these people feel like Jewish people were these bad people, right? And that they deserved everything that they were getting. It says audiences in our next section. There were several audiences for the Nazi propaganda. Germans were reminded of the struggle against foreign enemies and Jewish treason. Prior to laws or executive measure against Jews, propaganda campaigns created an atmosphere of tolerance, of violence against Jews. This was especially true in 1935, prior to the Nuremberg race laws of September, and in 1938, before the bombardment of anti-Semitic economic laws following the Kristallnacht. You heard about that in the video as well. That was the mass killing of the Jews on this particular day. It was called the Night of Broken Glass. The Nazi propaganda encouraged passivity and acceptance of these measures against Jews, as they appeared to show the Nazi government is stepping in and restoring order. So this propaganda was put out that, basically the Jewish people were out of control. They were causing all this trouble. They just weren't good people. And they were putting this out. And so the Nazi Party, again, was adding all of this to make it seem like, oh, we're going to put a stop to this, right? The next section is subjects. The subject of Nazi propaganda included real and perceived discrimination against ethnic Germans in East European nations who gained territory at Germany's expense following World War I, such as Czechoslovakia and Poland. This propaganda sought to provoke political loyalty and so-called race consciousness among ethnic German populations. It also aimed to mislead foreign governments. See, mislead right here. They were tricking people, right, using this propaganda, this news that they were putting out. It was aimed to mislead foreign governments, including the European great powers, that Nazi Germany was making understandable and fair demands for concessions and annexations. Soviet communism. After the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Nazi propaganda was targeted to civilians at home, soldiers, police officers, and non-Germans serving in occupied territory. So they had an audience, right? And they were trying to feed this information to certain groups of people to get them to see things their way. It says propaganda themes linked Soviet communism to European Jewry. They presented Germany as a defender of the Western culture against Judeo-Bolshevik threat. That means Jewish people, right? They painted an apocalyptic end of the world, basically, picture of what would happen if the Soviets won the war. This was particularly the case after the catastrophic German defeat at Stalingrad in February 1943. We talked about Stalingrad yesterday. These themes were likely instrumental or played a big part, is what it's saying, in encouraging Nazi and non-Nazi Germans to fight until the very end. Films. How did they use propaganda in films? The films played an important role in spreading racial anti-Semitism against Jewish people, the superiority of German military power, and the evil of the enemies, as defined by Nazi ideology. The Nazi film portrayed Jews as subhuman, meaning they weren't fully human, right? They saw them as subhuman creatures infiltrating Aryan society. For example, a film called The Eternal Jew in 1940 portrayed Jews as wandering cultural parasites consumed by money. That was another falsehood they put out. That Jewish people, all they wanted was everybody's money. And they made a whole movie about it. These people were really into fueling this propaganda and using it, right, to turn people against the Jewish people. In another movie or film, The Triumph of the Will, glorified Hitler, that guy that we talked about yesterday, Adolf Hitler, and his nationalist socialist movement. Festival of the Nations and Festivals of Beauty, created in 1938, it depicted or presented an argument that the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games and promoted national pride in the success of the Nazi regime at the Olympics. They used newspapers. Newspapers in Germany, especially Der Stürmer, which is the attacker, printed these cartoons, and that's what you see in the Canvas course today. I only put one or two in there for you, but they would even use cartoons to fuel, right, their hatred. And they used it as propaganda, right? And so they printed the cartoons using anti-Semitic caricatures, cartoon pictures to depict Jewish people or Jews. After the Germans started World War II with the invasion of Poland in 1939, the Nazi regime employed propaganda to impress upon German civilians that soldiers, that Jews were not only subhuman, but they were also dangerous enemies of the German Reich. The regime aimed to elicit support or get support, right? Or at least acceptance for these policies aimed at removing Jews permanently from areas of German settlement. Concentration camps, and that's something that we're going to be learning about a little bit more tomorrow. concentration camps when carrying out the so-called final solution. We talked about that yesterday, which was the mass murder of European Jews. The SS officials, one of your vocabulary words, at the killing centers compelled the victims of the Holocaust to maintain the deception necessary to deport Jews from Germany and occupied Europe as smoothly as possible. Concentration camp and killing center officials required the prisoners, many of whom who would soon die in the gas chambers, to send postcards home stating that they were being treated well and that they were living in good conditions, which that wasn't true, but they were forcing them to do this. Camp authorities used propaganda to cover up the atrocities and the maltreatment and the torture, right? And the mass murder. The German security police permitted an International Red Cross team to inspect the Theresienstadt camp ghetto located in what is today the Czech Republic, and they did this in 1944. The SS and the police established the camp in November of 1941 as an instrument of propaganda for domestic consumption in the German Reich. The camp ghetto was used as an explanation for Germans who were puzzled by the deportation or the movement of Jews. In preparation for the 1944 visit from the Red Cross, the camp underwent a quote-unquote beautification program. The SS officials produced this film using the residents as a demonstration of the caring treatment that they were enjoying. But again, as we just read up here, we know that they were forced to send these postcards and make it seem like they were really being treated well, because they did not want the Red Cross, who was coming in, to actually know that they were mistreating these Jewish people. They didn't want that to get out initially. It says when the film was completed, most of the cast was deported to the Auschwitz-Birkenau killing center. So basically, after they put on this show, right, at the concentration camps for the Red Cross who were coming in to visit to kind of see how everybody was being treated, they put on this big show. After they did that and got what they wanted from the prisoners in the camp, they sent them to Auschwitz. Remember, we talked about that was one of the #1 killing centers during that time for the Holocaust. They ended up sending these people to the gas chamber to be killed. So, Ms. Johnson, after all of this, learning about the different ways that propaganda was being used, what's the impact of it? The Nazi regime used propaganda effectively to rally or gain support for the German population, from the German population in support of its wars of conquest until the end of their regime or their time in power. Propaganda was essential. It was very important in motivating those who implemented the mass murder of the Jews as well as other people. So now once you've listened to that informational text about propaganda, what it was used for, the different ways that they disseminated or distributed this false information, now you are going to use this word bank to help you identify the description here, which this should be very, very simple for you, okay? After you do that particular section, you're going to come down and you have several multiple choice answers, questions, I should say, that you are going to be answering, all right? And you are more than welcome, as I always tell you, to always go back and revisit your text to answer these questions, all right? So you've got questions again about some of the posters, the propaganda that was used. And these are some examples. Remember, we talked about the SS and what that meant yesterday. And you're going to be making some inferences as well. Here, like on, for example, on number 16, the bottom poster reads, all 10-year-olds for us. What is the most likely reason Hitler would target young children? Why do you think he would want the